I'm going to give just a short intro, and then I'll turn it over to these two. Thank you so much for coming to Flyleaf, coming to our store, coming to our events. Your attendance is what allows us to have these events, and we really, really love to, so I appreciate you coming. This evening, we have the honor of hearing from Guinevere Turner about her memoir, When the World Didn't End, with Taylor H. Black. Guinevere Turner is an acclaimed screenwriter and director. She co-wrote the screenplays for American Psycho and The Notorious Betty Page, and most recently, wrote the screenplay for Charlie Says. She also wrote and starred in the film Go Fish, and was a writer and actor on Showtime's The L Word. Taylor H. Black currently teaches English at Duke and has published on 20th century American literature, popular music, gender and sexuality studies, queer theory, ontology and theories of becoming, and the subject and practices of style. Again, thank you. Remember, you can grab a copy of When the World Didn't End up front if you haven't already, and enjoy.
Hi, everybody. Do I sound really loud? Does it sound okay?
Perfect.
Thanks, Taylor, for coming. I am just going to start by reading a short piece. It's less than 5 minutes from the book, just to kind of, I don't know, I never know who in the audience has read the book or what the general vibe is, so I'll start by giving a general vibe. It's funny to me, it says a lot about the book, that the sort of most lighthearted chapter or little section that I want to read is about a kid getting his fingers chopped off. But it's somehow sweet. You'll see what I mean. It's somehow like it gives a good flavor for what the book is like, I think. The only things you need to know to understand this is that I'm 9, and when I was, when I was a kid, until literally 6 months after this story happens, I was called Jenny, which was Queen Guinevere's nickname. Though my given name is Guinevere. Thank God. Well, if you read the book, you'll see that that wasn't very easy when I was called Guinevere. I really asked my editor if I could call the book Guinevere. She said no. All right. The farm was enormous to me. We could run and run past fields and pastures and still be on our land. And even when we came to the low barbed wire fences that marked the property line, we'd just bend a small space open and crawl through to more pastures and fields where we saw no people, perhaps the occasional gathering of cows huddled under a tree for shade, and we'd keep running. Scratches on our backs from the barbs were common injuries. When I lived there for the first time, the layout of the farm was farmhouse, springhouse, bunkhouse, barn, chicken house, silo, treehouse, woodshed, then strawberry field, cornfield, sorghum fields, reefer field, potato field. There was a magical mulberry tree in front of the bunkhouse. To get the mulberries out of this grand tree, we would climb high into it, creep out onto its most delicate branches and shake them, causing the mulberries to rain down on the sheet the other kids were holding below. Our faces, our hands, the sheet, everything would be stained with mulberry juice. Once or twice a day, a pickup truck would drive by on the dirt road, kicking up clouds of dust. The nearest town was a half-hour drive, and the nearest hospital more than an hour. I only came to understand how isolated we were the day Gabriel's fingers were cut off. Of the boys, I loved Gabriel the most. We always seemed to be sitting next to each other, laughing about something and being shushed. He had a thick mop of sandy hair that hung over his eyes, and he was fun to talk to because he started a lot of conversations with, "What if?" This led to wild flight of fancy scenarios where we had wings or were blind. I'd had a crush on him since the day he claimed he wanted to marry me. He'd said this in front of adults, and when one of them asked, "Well, how would you support her if you married her?" he thought for a moment and then said, "I'd knock out all of my teeth and sell them to the tooth fairy." The adults made fun of him for this, but I thought it was charming, and my future with a toothless and devoted husband seemed bright. In truth, his crush played out more like the time when he claimed that he could kill me with a pencil, and I said laughing, "No, you won't," and raised my hand in faux defense. He accidentally stabbed my palm with his pencil and got in trouble for it. It was an accident," I pleaded to no avail. "Why would you threaten to kill her?" he was asked in all seriousness. And when I said he was just joking, I was told to shut up and leave the room. The day Gabriel had to go to the hospital, the kids were outside chopping wood, a daily task since the houses we lived in were heated by wood stoves. The wood was always cedar, and we loved the beautiful red inside it and the gorgeous way it smelled when you chopped it. We'd invented a game called This Is Your Heart, where we'd find a perfect piece of cedar that could fit in the palm of your hand. We'd put it on the chopping block, and if it was your heart in question, you had to grab it off the block before the kid wielding the axe could chop it in half. Moments before, I'd already won, breathlessly snatching the piece of wood and laughing when the blade of the axe landed with a thud into the block and my cedar heart was safely intact in my hand. I put it back in the center of the block and teased Gabriel, "This is your heart now." Matthew raised the axe high over his head and Gabriel lunged for his heart. He grabbed it, raising his hand high in the air in triumph. "Ha, I got it," he said, then looked around at all of our faces. We weren't laughing with him, only staring in stunned silence. He followed our sightline to his hand, still raised in the air and spraying blood where 4 of his fingers had been hacked off just above the knuckles. He screamed. We all screamed and ran the short distance up the stairs to the farmhouse. Inside, utter chaos ensued. As adults scrambled to wrap what was left of his maimed hand in a dish towel, they screamed questions at us like, "What the fuck were you kids doing out there? And where are the damn keys to the truck?" Gabriel had turned quite blue in the face and didn't make a sound. "Jesus Christ, where are the fingers? Somebody shoved a plastic baggie in my face. Jenny, snap the fuck out of it and go get his fingers." I grabbed the baggie and ran down to the chopping block, where the tops of his 4 fingers lay in a pool of blood. There was no time to cry about it. I threw them into the bag, then ran up to the truck where Gabriel was being rushed into the passenger seat. Yvonne took the fingers from me and put them into a bucket of ice, and then the truck peeled out and down the dirt road. The other kids were standing wordlessly nearby on the stairs, and I wiped my bloody hands on my overalls and watched the truck disappear on the horizon. When they came back the next day, Gabriel was in surprisingly good spirits, seemingly excited by the adventure. The doctors had not been able to reattach the fingers, and he had pieces of skin sewn on top of them. "Look," he said, pulling down his pants and showing us his right butt cheek where the wounds from 4 perfect squares were healing. "I have butt skin on my hands now." He menaced us playfully with his butt hand, and with that, we decided it was okay to laugh about it. That's that.
So, why not? For those of you who are or have yet to just bought a copy of the book and have yet to read it, why don't you introduce the world that this young woman, this person, you emerges from? What is normal for you at this time in the world? What's going on? Where are you?
The title refers to what happens in the very first couple chapters of the book, which is that I was raised in a family that we call the communities, in my adult life have come to understand as a cult, that was isolated and homeschooled and really cut off from whatever mainstream society was, and I was born into it. And we had compounds around the country, and so this I'm on the compound in Kansas, and that was my life. And in the very beginning of the book, we were told that the world was going to end and we were going to live on Venus, and but that didn't happen, obviously. And so it's just about what life was like. Well, it begins anyway. What life was like, in a post. We're not moving to Venus reality, which was weird. So yeah, it's this. The book is about that, and then about leaving that.
And so I imagine that part of what will be appealing to readers who are coming to the book will be a sense that this will contribute to their sense of a kind of what it's becoming, this kind of entertainment about cults, right? And I wonder in writing this, or actually what you think this book has to offer. My response was that it was wonderfully unusual. It wasn't what I expected. But I wonder if you could say something about your sense of the market that this book is going into and what it's doing to contribute to or to respond to the kind of proliferation of cult media, cult entertainment.
This man, by the way, just taught a class called Drink the Kool-Aid.
Some of my students are here.
Which is focused also on the representation of cults, right?
Right.
I'm way before I wrote this book, I have just been paying attention to every cult in the media and reading about them and reading how they're represented, and then I'm sure everyone who consumes media in this room feels this like real popularity of cult content, for lack of a better term, now, especially documentaries, and that's something I think a lot about, because who are they for? You know, cult documentaries are not like The Inconvenient Truth. You know, they're not a call to arms, so they're just entertainment. And why do people feel so comfortable saying, "Oh, I'm obsessed with cults"? It's like saying, "I'm obsessed with human trafficking." Mm-hmm. You know, it's so where I fit in is, after reading, one of the things I did was read particularly memoirs by women, particularly cult memoirs. There's one right there called "Educated" that was on Barack Obama's reading list, and it's her story. And I was actually really influenced by that book because her story is fascinating, and it's written well, but every other page has a footnote that says Uncle so-and-so doesn't remember it this way. Or, you know, I think this, but, you know, it could be this, this, and this. And so she's second guessing herself, and sort of, to me, leaving the reader kind of like, well, what did happen? And so one of the main things I thought is I need to write it in a sure-footed way, and I need to write it without any wisdom and without any adult perspective, because that's kind of an ironclad way to tell the story, because I'm not saying this is what happened, this is what I think about it. I'm saying this is what I remember, this was my experience. And in that way, I feel like it is different, because different from other books that are written by people who grew up in cults, because I took myself, my grown-up self, out of it, and I'm not trying to tell anyone what to think or even what I learned, because I feel a lot of the books that I've read it's the only book that person has written, and it feels like they feel the need to explain or give the kind of outsider's view, or give the gory, culty details that are going to sell a book.
Right.
I mean, those are just in there because that was my life. But so that was what I when I was really trying to figure out my way into the story. I was just thinking about staying inside the story and not contributing to a canon of cult book.
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah, I mean, because the whole everything in the cult, you know, all this kind of entertainment is about the expose, right? I mean, when we say cult, we mean a sect, we mean a small religious group, we mean a group which defines itself as being separate from the dominant culture. But when we talk about cults in the 20th century, especially after Manson, and we are also talking about a small group which is menacing in some way, which is dangerous, which is represented in media as being dangerous or violent in some way, not just carved out, not just separate from. And so I think when we, you know, these people who say, "Oh, I like cult stuff," or I'm interested in narratives about people who have come out of cults, I think what we're doing is in some ways trying to satisfy our desire to see someone that we define as being other than us, right? I mean, what we really mean by cult is someone that we don't want to be, and that we think that, and we think of as being problematic or dangerous.
And it intersects with the, you know, passion that most people have to some degree, true crime.
Exactly.
Which is, I think that most people would agree that is kind of like, well, my life might be effed up, but their life, it's not that bad, you know. I think and cults weirdly fall into the true crime genre, which I think is so interesting, because actually to be in a cult is not a crime.
Right.
But you're never going to see a documentary about a cult that didn't commit a crime of some kind.
Mm-hmm.
But they must be out there. They're just living their lives and
right.
either not getting caught or actually imagine not committing crimes. It's kind of
right.
hard to imagine, but.
And in a lot of these memoirs and narratives, what we get is someone who has escaped. That's usually the story and the expose of the cult after that escape. Your story is different. And the way that it's structured formally is different because of the fact that you are born into the cult and that you leave it at age 11. Could you talk a little bit about how you think that frames this book and your specific narrative, which is not exactly an expose about this group or a story about your escape from it?
Yeah, I mean, the kind of joke I've been making is, I'm in a community of, cult survivors and fascinating people, specifically people who are raised in them. And if you think this is a 60s and 70s phenomenon, I know women in their 30s who just got out of cults like 5 years ago. It's alive and well in many forms. But everybody identifies as survivors, and my joke is, can I call myself a survivor if I beg to stay? Because I did, and that you'll see in the book is I didn't want to go. I didn't know my mother. She left. I didn't want to go with her. I don't think I would still be there, but I didn't escape. I was kicked out. And I think one of the surprising things about the book and about my story is that the cult life was a beach party compared to life outside of the cult. So that's my little like, haha, got you. You go like, ooh, cult book, this is gonna be crazy. I'm like, no, that's the fun part.
Because the first half of the book, we follow your lead, and you are a child, and you're a child living in a world that is normal to you. And so, you keep waiting for that moment as someone who feels like they know what they're expecting in these books. You keep waiting for that moment where you're reflecting or exposing your reality, but you're true to the form, and you stick to what you were able to see and feel as a child, which is this is a normal world, and then you get thrown into the real world, thrown back into your family, and that's the real freak show in this book. I mean, is the experience you have trying to acclimate yourself to living in a nuclear family.
I'm living in a world where, one of my first shocks was like in the middle of the school day, you change your clothes and go get sweaty, and then I was like, what is that? And then like we're just getting naked in front of each other, and I was like, oh God, people are so weird out here. It was. I mean, you're not weird if you're surrounded by people who are weird like you. You're weird when you're out in the rest of the world. Yeah, I didn't know I was weird. I found out really quick.
So to read this, you went back and you read a lot of your diaries and journals. What was that like? And had you read them over the years, or was this your first time sort of going back in and piecing things together in that way?
The two diaries that I use the most in the book are 1979 and 1980, and those were the time that start when I'm still in the family, and then through the transition into the real world. And because I was so sad and dying to get back to the family and working toward it and trying really hard to figure out how I would get back there, I would read these diaries to myself and look at the notes that my friends had left me written inside of them, and then recite people's names and just like never let go of like the songs and the movies and like everything that I grew up with. So these two diaries in particular, like I've always carried around with me. They just became these kind of precious artifacts. And then even when I started to realize like, oh, how I grew up is not that great, and there were really actually horrible things about it, I still it was almost like there's another dimension, and this is an object from that dimension that those people touched, and I'll never see them again. So I could practically recite them because I had read them so much already. But when I started the endeavor, the task, the unexpected journey of writing this book, I thought, are these just a background resource for me? Like, how am I going to use these? And now that I use them a lot and sort of build stories around them, it makes me laugh, or that sort of gasp, like, oh, what if I hadn't realized that I really needed to use them, because they lend that my voice. I'm such a grown up. Yeah. At 9 and 10 and 11, it's that it's just, there's no denying that. I didn't write that, she wrote that kid wrote that, and I'm a very serious kid, and the things that I'm thinking about like God and truth and like being a good person, but not in a particularly Christian way, in a really scattered sort of like all over the place culty way, is that I think this is it kind of gives it's undeniable. Mm-hmm. I didn't make it up. That's what that kid wrote.
Yeah. There's a strange mix, and we talked about this earlier this week, but your the child version of you is a strange mix of just totally innocent and open to things, you know, the kind of person who would read their own diaries to calm themselves down, but also very knowing and serious and possessed in a way. I compared it to there's a child in a Flannery O'Connor story called The River. If those of you that know it, that just seemed very, very similar in that way. Just this combination of innocent and uncorrupted, and also somehow like strangely wise, and that comes across in the book to me in your dealings with adults, especially in the second half of the book, as you're learning how to deal with teachers, but also with your mother, who you don't really know, and her boyfriend. Like, what was that? It's amazing. Those of you who've read it will see. It's amazing to see how you negotiate with them and how well you sort of like deflect things that you seem to understand aren't really about you or whatever. But what is? I mean, maybe it's sort of strange, I guess, asking someone what it's like to negotiate with other people, because perhaps you don't think about it. But I don't know. I mean, do you understand what I'm saying? I mean, did you marvel at that as you were recreating these moments?
I did. I was, especially reading and reconstructing that time of my life, especially the being from like 12 to 15, when I was dealing with this abusive household and all these kind of constant, like you have to be on your toes all the time to just escape the whatever danger. But because of the way that I was raised, and the doctrine that I was raised with in this family was so like shape-shifting, and nothing was written down. It wasn't like a Bible verse you could refer to or anything. I think that this kind of hyper-vigilance and like taking cues from adults, not like in a way like, is this gonna make them mad?
Yeah.
How can I get out of this? How can I get out of this room? Or how can I change the situation? I think that I had, and all the kids that I grew up with had learned how to, at a really early age, like paying attention to really subtle cues from adults is going to save your ass.
Yeah, and there's like moments like when you're in school and you're making friends and you come across as weird. Like you notice that you're staring at, or one of your friends tells you, you just got to stop staring at people like that.
Yeah, that was day 2.
Yeah, and day 2, and like I knew what it was like at that age to feel weird, but you have this very adult or sort of advanced way of not sort of just feeling like victimized by them thinking you're weird, but understanding that they're going to think I'm weird. I know who I am, but I need to also develop a persona which is going to allow me to negotiate with these people, so that they can be comfortable around me. I don't know, that seems really, really emotionally advanced for me. Again, something you don't expect to read in a memoir about a childhood of coming out of a cult and going into an abusive situation.
I know it's very chicken egg to me, because like obviously as a writer, as an actor, attention to detail and human behavior is key.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I'm like that, and so writing just seemed like the obvious thing to do with it.
Yeah.
Like I observe so much detail, I gotta write something down. Or if it's that the other way around, that I've just always been that kind of hyper aware of details. Yeah. But then when I was writing the book, there was this whole part that is directly taken from one of my diaries, where I'm 9 years old and I suddenly am overwhelmed with how every moment can't be preserved.
Yeah.
And so I just get obsessed, and I just decide that there's a squirrel on this branch out the window, and I'm gonna remember this forever. And here I am talking about it. To what end? I do not know. Yes, I remember the squirrel, but that I was already this sort of like panicky archivist, overwhelmed by how much experience we have at 9, and can we possibly remember it all?
Yeah.
So I think that just might be in my DNA.
Well, you're having a midlife existential crisis at 9 years old, right? A 9-year-old isn't supposed to
All
think
of this will be
about
lost.
And so, I mean, I wonder, sort of if I can ask this delicately, if part of also, a lot of that is you, it's your style, it's your persona. Of course, you're an actor, you're a writer, you understand the human condition, and I accept that comes innately to you. But also, we meet you when you, as a product of this whole world and this worldview. And again, in the book, it's the normal, the world that you come out of. It's not the unusual. It's not the strange. So I'm wondering, is there something about what you were taught about the worldview that you found was actually, I don't know, word is useful, an interest, I mean, important, like what was it that formed you? What was it about what you learned? Do you have a sense of what that might be?
It's an interesting and complicated question. My number one goal at that age, when I'm deeply observing everyone around me and trying not to stand out, which took a while. It took like a year. Basically, I had to go to a different school where all those kids who saw the weirdo me were integrated into a much bigger high school,
Right.
and then they, everyone went on their separate paths. So I was afraid they were contagious. That so I was raised that there was us and there was world people, and that world people were evil, and that if you spent too much time with them, they could get into your soul. So I was almost observing them to make sure to know the enemy, and then to have that no attention drawn to me to copy the enemy.
Right.
So it's that kind of a really basic kind of thing of just studying this creature so it couldn't get into my soul.
So if I were to ask you on your way into school the first day, what is it that makes them world people? What is it that constitutes them being an enemy? What is it about them? What was your idea of them before you met them? Well, what were you trying to beware of?
Well, they didn't have any souls.
Okay.
All of them. They weren't us. Really, it was just us, the 160 people that I grew up with, and everybody else was evil, corrupt, soulless, and would try to, maybe the devil was in them, but the
Right.
devil, it wasn't really a Christian devil.
Yeah.
Just general yikes, stay away, it's contagious. But then what happened to me pretty quickly was that I started to like people, and I started to have fun with things, and I was so excited that there was an actual school and textbooks, and I was good at not all of it because I was homeschooled, so math I almost got left behind. But
You knew astrology very well.
I had a lot of astrology and a fair amount of world history, and I was just excited. I just was really, and there were not enough books and there was not enough formal learning for my taste growing up. So then I started to like it.
Yeah.
I loved school, and some girls were really nice to me, and then I started to feel guilty. And then I heard, Michael Jackson's Off the Wall, and thought it was such an amazing record, and then felt really guilty about that because that was evil devil people world music. And I tried to convince myself that if the leader of the cult had ever heard it, then maybe he would like it. Because it was so good.
We have very, very strong opinions about music and film.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, he did, yeah.
Do they sit with you still?
Well, luckily he had good taste. So there was this thing called the Lord's List, which was all the movies that we had. They were the only movies we could watch, and we had to watch them when they were on. But they were Humphrey Bogart, Lauren Bacall, Betty Davis, Joan Crawford, Katharine Hepburn. You know what I mean? They were. I grew up with a really interesting, but very, very specific time period, education in film, and the music also.
And you were asked to interpret in this way, and this is something to do with what I'm picking up on about your kind of your advanced kind of emotional awareness, is that you were asked not just to report plot lines the way that a lot of us would be asked at that age. What happened in Charlotte's Web? What's the lesson? You were asked to sort of, ruminate, reckon, or
Yeah, especially with the music, because he would make tapes. What do you call tapes? That would, usually mixtapes. Sometimes they were his music. Also, it was, Benny Goodman, Ella Fitzgerald, big band, the Andrews Sisters, and then his music, and Woody Guthrie, and a lot of folk stuff. Not Bob Dylan, the devil, not the Beatles, the devil, nothing, and those, when he would make a tape, which he would issue once or twice a year, we would have to write a letter to him about what we thought about it. And it couldn't just be it was really good.
Right.
It'd be this song made me feel this way, right. And overall, you had to be a critic with something original to say.
So we're sort of talking around him, and in a way the book does too. It's appropriate because he's like God. He's indirect. He's not there.
The
right?
Great and Terrible Oz.
Yes. But he was. For those of us who are just arriving at the book, who was he, and what's his relationship with the music? Because I think.
Who he was is so interesting because I don't really know, and I never knew, and what he really believed and what he was really like were not things that I had access to. Everything was, third and fourth party information. But I know just basically he was a musician, a banjo player, harmonica player, singer, and from Oklahoma, and he just wanted to get out and record his music, but somehow, and I don't know how, he ended up starting a cult.
And he played at the 64 Newport Folk Festival. I was thinking of that when you said Dylan was the devil. I'm just wondering how much of this too. I was going to ask you what he thought of some of his contemporaries in the folk music world, but I'm assuming that
he was definitely anti-Bob Dylan.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And very anti-Beatles. Like the Beatles, he were literally the devil's music. It took me a while to just chill and listen to the Beatles. It doesn't feel that devilish to me.
I found some of his music. Do you ever listen to it now?
No. I mean, no.
Okay. I found some of it one night on YouTube. Someone had put something up. It's nice. I can see. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what if I was asked to explain what it meant. I don't know if the child figured it on that, but he was certainly talented. There's a moment to go back to the school. There's a moment actually where you where you are not this, where you seem to have sort of acclimated to the real world, and you're not just on reflection mode in this way. But there's a moment where you were talking about doing a project, and the project is on People's Temple, on the Jonestown thing. And I wonder what you thought of, if that was a moment that allowed you to see yourself from above, or if you know, what that, or did you not understand, you know, at the time, the relevance of that?
It's hilarious how much I did not understand that it had anything to do with me. I just remember we had to do a research paper, and I knew about the story, and then I saw that, you know, the cover of Newsweek with all the dead bodies from the mass suicide, and I was like, wow, these people, this is so interesting. And it's actually the only time I use the word cult in the whole book, is because the headline said cult instead of it. Yeah. I know I zero connection.
Right.
I just thought it was really interesting, and I had never the word cult, I'd never connected it to us. And even though, you know, I was raised with this kind of rhetoric, like, we're not the Manson family,
right,
like those people are crazy. There's still the word cult was never said. Like contemporary cults today, they're often like the NXIVM guy and, you know, the other sort of ones. They are proactively talk about how they're not a cult, and they use the word cult.
Right.
But they never did. And so, yeah, I was 100% writing a research paper about Jim Jones, thinking, like, what a bunch of weirdos, and that's so sad, and just.
I mean, I think that's usually the case. The cult is never us; it's always someone else, if we know the word, right? And that's why this book is so interesting, because you refuse to allow your reader to sort of just like, if we have this fantasy that we're gonna, like, you know, rubberneck with you at the them, you know, you refuse us that, right? Because that's not your reality. You know, you don't sentimentalize that, and I for one really appreciated that. But also, you know, but what like I said, what is really hard to read in the book is what you had to go through and your family, like, afterward. I mean, in some ways it seems like the real cult story, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, the general idea, I think, was that my mom's boyfriend, left the cult so he could start his own cult. And he never let go of the doctrine. He had photos of the leader on the walls. He played their music. We weren't allowed to listen to it. He just wanted a mini cult. So yeah, it was a lot worse. But it should be noted that if I had stayed in that cult, I wasn't a teenager yet. I know from especially the girls that I grew up with, the women that I grew up with now, that once my whole generation became teenagers, everything got totally insane and super violent and super alcohol infused and just volatile. And I think that makes sense if you think about, you start this utopian ideal, you have these little kids running around, but eventually they're going to grow up and want, well, first of all, not to just be in relationships with each other. We were like brothers and sisters. And second of all, to maybe not choose this life. Right. So I missed that.
Yeah.
At least.
I mean, your mom's boyfriend sort of makes it apparent, and kind of grotesquely apparent, that the cult is just an overblown patriarchal unit, right?
Yeah.
There's a moment at the end of the book, actually, where it's the happy part of the book where, again, not like any other cult expose book where you go back to see your former, family members, and you are kind of having a nice time, and you're sitting around, and they're asking, you're getting ready to go to college, and they're asking you about what's going on, and you notice that all the women are doing things for all the men, and you say, oh, this is exactly what my mother's boyfriend wanted, and in that moment I realized that what you've done here is sort of show us like what the cult kind of does. It bases itself on the patriarchal family structure and puts at the center of it this man who needs all this attention and needs everyone around him to sort of like service him and be there for him and tell him that not only that they're grateful for him for providing for them, but that they need him in order to live. It was just you don't say this explicitly, but it felt like an interesting and important sort of moment of like a kind of feminist awareness about the cult, or distance from the cult.
I mean, I do think that that's one of the sort of projects of this book is demystifying in a way, and it's like, or rather saying, I think the nuclear family is a cult.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just they're not always bad, but like there is, the patriarchal system is that, and all of these abuses happen on smaller scales or less, actionable or worthy of a documentary, but it's the same shit,
right? Just
bigger scale. And at least when I was growing up, there were tons and tons of other kids, and in a way there was a place to escape to, and there was the culture of just kids, and like when you have that many kids, when they didn't try to turn us against each other, there was a joy in that and a safety, and having each other's backs in a way that it was safer, except for the fact that we're really far away from hospitals, and they would give us an axe and tell us to go jump 1 or 7, not paying attention to the game. This is your heart, which might end in tears.
As you could see in a lot of like post 1950s sort of generally leftist cults, this kind of interest in like breaking up the nuclear family unit, having something like conceptualizing something different. But what you see is just a sort of like a more elaborate family unit with just one daddy at the center.
Right. Yeah. No, it's abuse of power.
Yes.
On a grander scale,
yes.
But arguably so is patriarchy on a smaller scale.
And then making that seem really interesting, and then making that you're like making that kind of mystical.
Right, and making it seem like it's different.
Yes.
But it's really like I'm going to take you away from all of your little
yes.
mini patriarchal units and make it into one big monster.
Yes. So I've been talking a while. Let's take some questions from you guys. Maybe enough from me. Questions from the perspective of someone who's read or not read are welcome.
This is me. No, I'm just going to tell you facts since someone asked me a question. This is me. I am 7. There's a whole part that thing that happened to me as a kid that I just didn't fit into the story. I've been teaching screenwriting for years, and it's always hard to tell someone when they're writing a personal story, like, that really emotional thing that happened to you, it really doesn't move the story forward. So I was also said that to myself. There's a part in the book where they send me to go see my mom, who was living in this San Francisco compound, and I was 6 or 7, and I flew by myself from LA to New York, which might have been the first time I'd ever flown, and it was by myself. And the stewardess was bringing me out, and I saw my mom, but she just walked right past me. She didn't recognize me. She hadn't seen me in like 4 years. And this photo was taken a couple days later. So that is me looking up at her like, who the fuck are you?
Yeah.
I didn't want to use this photo, but my publisher really liked it. And then one of the women I grew up with was like, come on, you look like the perfect culty kid. Just let him use it. Okay, we can just mingle after, I guess.
So I finished this book at 4 this morning. So I finished reading it at 4 this morning.
Oh, wow.
So I came to ask, okay, people in the book, which of them are okay? Like the girls you grew up with, did most of them leave? Or some of them, are they not also alive? Like, how is everybody? How are they doing?
How is everybody? They are, so the complicated thing about my generation is that some are very out. where like they left, it was hard, they fought, it, you know, like Clotilde, for example, she didn't get out till she was 27. We are close, she is married and she sued the family and she's the only one of any of us who just says the word cult aggressively. Like even I'm sort of like, I say cult because that's how other people understand it, but I'm still not entirely comfortable using that word. She's just like the cult this, the cult that, the cult this. So she's doing really well. But for a lot of us, a lot of people got married and then they have kids, and because they want their kids to have a relationship with their grandparents who are still in the family, they're kind of walking this line of, it's a tricky line because they're very in or out, but of course those people want to see their grandkids too. So almost everybody is okay, but I'm not in touch with everybody because the women, the people who chose to stay, I was already kind of out. Now I am a full-on pariah to those people. So although, you know, they secretly write me on Facebook and say like, that was so brave. Don't ever tell me when I talk to you. So complicated, case by case basis. Jesse just passed away in February. But mostly, like a lot of the women in particular that I grew up with have gotten in touch with me in various ways and said, I'm here to do press if you want to do press. Like they're no one that I grew up with has ever spoken publicly about this or written about it. But I do feel, and I hope, that I just kind of broke the seal because my story is just one. And because it's such a network, a gossiping network, all of us, I know that a lot of them are like, you made it sound so like beautiful and easy. I'm like, did you read the rest of the book or did you just like stop after it wasn't about you guys anymore? I guess, you know, and then as the book goes on, I start to remember things that, you know, weren't so great. So apparently everyone's writing a book. I was talking to Daria the other day. She's like, everyone's writing a book. And I was like, who's writing a book? She's like, I can't tell you. Ever dramatic, the Princess Daria. So I'm hoping to actually sort of help some of these women tell their stories. And really hoping that I don't want to stand out here alone. And, you know, in terms of being the only one who's talking about it, because I don't even know the half of it apparently.
If you were to think of a good way to grow up, how would you describe that?
That's Faulkner. She asked, is it, if I was to think of a good way to grow up, what would that be?
Yeah, like what would be the qualities of it?
I mean, the way I grew up was amazing outside of all of the violence and horribleness.
Yeah.
I mean, growing up on big pieces of land with a lot of other kids your age, with music and, you know, communal dinners and working the land, maybe not like a child labor force, but like, you know, like having a relationship with animals and plants and stuff, like all of that on paper is great. I just think that, I don't know, I mean, I could endlessly ruminate about utopian ideals and how they go wrong and insular small communities and how they inevitably power dynamics will arise. And we know this even from, you know, an activist community or any community that you're in, that there's always going to be someone or something that causes conflict and then things get corrupt. So I don't know, but I mean, you can tell from reading my book that there were a lot of things about growing up that way that I really loved. But I don't know how. I haven't figured out the model for how to decentralize power permanently. There isn't one.
Right.
I want that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Catherine, you're gonna ask a question.
Oh, I mean, I have a million questions. I mean, I just, like, I wonder, I mean, like, I'd love for you to write another, you know, volume of your story, like, when you went to Sarah Lawrence and, like, what happened there, and, you know, like, just, like, I mean, I love this book. Like, I am one of the people who loves cults and true crime and kind of anything something about humanity that, like the dark side of humanity. I mean, I identify, I guess what I, other than, I don't feel an otherness to the people telling their story. I guess having been in abusive relationships, I'm very much related to that just sort of, when you've been subject to gaslighting, like a cult is just a beautiful way of like, there's, like this is definitely wrong. Like when you have to, I mean, for me to look like, yes, there's abuse of power, it is validating to me.
Yeah, and I definitely, I wrote this film called Charlie Says, which is about the women and who killed for Manson. And I came to that conclusion, and I ended up speaking about it a lot when I was talking about it to the press, that if you understand domestic violence and abusive relationships, it's the cults are just that on a larger scale, and with a even more isolated, or or whatever. But yeah, it's the exact same dynamic, and the way that people get sucked in without realizing it's the same thing. It's the love bombing, and then the isolation from family and friends, and then the when it's too late, then all of a sudden then the person has nowhere to go. And it's the exact same model.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what resonates for me is like it validates when I felt like things were not going well, and same with like kind of true crime. Like you hear these stories about how people get manipulated, and it just kind of helps me piece out things, in my own experience, and I find it very healing. But what I wanted to say about, and I've read a lot of books about high control groups and manipulation and whatnot, and this story, you really, I think that in the end, I think your editor kept telling you stay in the scene, and I feel like that advice, in addition to just your amazing talent at writing, help, you tell it from a perspective of how you experienced it or how you remember experiencing it, that it has this purity to it, and it's just so amazingly well written, and I'm just really struck too because I was listening to an interview, I didn't get to finish it, but it was Let's Talk About Sex.
It's a podcast called Let's Talk About Sex, SECTS, even though it has that cheeky sounding, maybe trashy title. It's actually one of the best. Like she is asked such good questions and is so into the subject in a way that feels really kind of productive and like with heart,
Yeah, I mean, I can see myself. I didn't know about it until you mentioned it I think it was on Instagram, and so I was like, yeah, I'm gonna have to listen to all of this now. But she had said, what would you tell people who saw you and thought you were perfectly fine in the cult? And you're like, well, no one saw us,
right?
And I think you did talk too about then being in your family, you're right there interacting with people all day in, day out, and you still aren't seen.
Yeah.
It doesn't help you get help. That really, there's just something really haunting about that whole fact.
I know she asked me in that interview, how do you think you would be, if you were in a position to be around, young people, how would you, knowing what I know, which is it's very easy to cover up what's really happening to you, depending on who you are, how I would handle that. And I think I would be a really insane teacher. I would just be like, how are you? No, but really, how are you? Wait, I saw you blink. What's going on in your home? I'm going to beat your parents. I just feel like I don't know, because we all know, anyone who knows anything about dynamics of abusive relationships and abusive households, is that, hiding it is is somehow built into the abuse,
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I think I wish that I had a solution, like a thing to tell, people who are in situations where they're around young people. I mean, there are people go to school for it, people learn signs of abuse, but as I write in my book, I looked up all those signs and I'm like, I don't have any of them.
Yeah.
Why am I not puking all the time or pulling my hair out?
You were protecting your sister, I imagine, and your mother.
I guess, yeah.
If any detection, it was amazing how sophisticated you were and making decisions about the whole family unit. In that, I mean, especially being out of the cult.
It's funny because when I was talking with Vivian Gornick, who she wrote a blurb for my book, and she's this writer who's in her 80s, and I really love her work. And she, as I was writing, I would just have lunch with her sometimes, and she was like, "Whatever you do, don't make yourself the hero." And I really try to be like, to show myself not always stepping up or doing the right thing, but when you talk about it, I'm like, oh no, did I make myself the hero?
Well, I just have one question, and I'll stop dominating. I'm sorry, I really could just take your time, but do you still have a relationship with your mother?
Ish. I mean, I have siblings, and so I try not to make their lives difficult by just not talking to her. So we're civil. We're not friends. I have not yet heard her response to this book, but I don't imagine she will like it.
It's hard to look in the mirror.
Yes.
I have a question. I don't come from this book. I'm to this book from liking cults or being interested in that. I actually grew up in a very conservative Christian religious community, which used the word "the world" all the time to separate us and isolate us from people. And so I love reading stories about people that have figured out a way to move beyond that space. And I wonder, this use of cult, this word a lot, right? I haven't finished the book, and it sounds like you don't use it a lot, but it's being in this conversation a lot. It's actually a word that's divisive, meaning that, right, some cults are bad, but other groups that are using the same techniques are not bad.
I mean, I could talk endlessly on this subject, and I have, because I'm in this survivor community, a lot of whom are, it's what they come from is like a Christian family or group that just went, like whatever church they were in wasn't enough, and they just took it to some extreme and isolated, and that's Jehovah's Witnesses who did that, and Mormons who did that, and all of it's, and a lot of them, it's just really extreme Christianity, and so I've been asking all of them, how do you feel about this word? And some of them, they only say high control group, or just talking in terms of coercive control. But then some of them really feel empowered, like my friend Clotilde that I was talking about, that they're just like, yeah, it's a fucking cult, and like cult, and like, let's call it what it is. And, and so that, to me, I'm hesitant to call the people I grew up with the cult just because they're all alive and they're listening to interviews that I do, and I know they're like, oh, okay. Even though they check all the boxes, So I don't know. I mean, again, like when I was sort of railing against, all these documentaries that cult documentaries people just love and are obsessed with, and feeling sort of like almost protective or defensive for the subjects because they feel so judged. And then I was talking to a guy who's in the one of the only guys who's in the Survivor network, who said he was watching Wild Wild Country and that's what made him realize he was in a cult. So I was like, oh, okay, so these documentaries aren't made for those people, and he's not the only one who has said that it's a documentary. Also, interesting fun fact, COVID got a lot of people out of cults because they were suddenly not, surrounded by the language and the tasks of the community, and they were isolated, and all of a sudden they were like watching Wild Wild Country, and really, I'm like, wow, silver lining of COVID, it got a lot of people out of cults. There are also several people in the group that I'm in. So anyway, I don't know. Do you feel like, are you saying that you feel that you wish that you could call what you grew up in a cult because it feels like that?
I think it is.
Like you don't get to be in the cult club?
That there are adults that I grew up in that community with that were like in the government, right? They're like, yeah.
I mean, it's always a projection, isn't it? Cult. I mean, it's always something we put on someone else. It's not something we put on ourselves.
Nobody ever calls himself a cult,
like
that's
said,
for
even,
sure.
Especially the cultists. And in general, we know a cult because of it's small. I mean, it's in the term. It's a small part of a larger culture. But the other side of COVID was QAnon. I mean, a lot of people have gotten into QAnon, and what we're seeing now, I think, is we're having a very dominant. This is very big. You know, this is now we have a dominant part of our political conversation without having to go there, which is very much sort of organized around all these metaphors of the world. The world is bad. Now, if you're not ensconced in that whole worldview, you're a sheep or you're a cult member. You know, so again, it's I don't know. That's another reason I think this cult media has been on the increase, is because we're trying to figure out why we are so susceptible as a nation to these kinds of certain kinds of charismatic figures, or certain kinds of personalities, certain kinds of paranoia. This is an old story in America, but it's coagulating right now. You know,
I was trying to think of it in a global context. Are we the cultiest country? But you know, there are cults around the world, in Japan in particular, and Korea, and Australia, teeming with cults.
we have Hollywood too.
Yeah. So no, it's not just an American problem. I think it's just I think ours are the worst at hiding their crimes.
We have 5 more minutes, maybe one more question.
Well, also, but I wanted to say finally too that this, I know it sounds like I'm getting paid to talk about this organization, but they are very open to talking to people who didn't necessarily grow up in a cult in that way, but had to get out of a high control group, a high demand group, and had to like sort of relearn what's right and what's wrong. So ask me later if you want to know who they are, because they're lovely, and all their meetings are on Zoom, and so it's really international. And like I when I first started going to their meetings, I was like, I want to be in a group with people who joined cults and are now out. Like, we're not those fools, all judgmental and not inclusive. Because, you know, but they actually, I got over myself, because obviously those people are on their own healing journey too. But it's so nice to be in a group that is specifically for those of us who are born into it, and whatever those issues are for us. So highly recommend. I'm gonna give you that information so you can be a part of a community, because it's been, I've spent my whole adult life looking for therapists who knew about cults, for anyone who can really come at this subject from a healing place that didn't mean that I had to teach them for 6 months, and I finally found it.
How did you go about writing this and now talking about it so much and not having your brain get stuck in these violent moments and revisiting them?
The question I meant to ask, in case you didn't hear, sorry, it's you see how that makes me laugh? I'm crazy. She asked, how did I write about this? Do I continue talking about it and not get stuck in the violent moments and some of the violent things that happen to me and the people around me? I tell you, being a survivor of trauma gives you the ability to compartmentalize, and if you just turn that into a superpower instead of a personality flaw, you know, the hard part was being in it and writing it, and you know, living with that for like a year and a half. But now it's like there's so much good stuff. There's so many conversations and so many people who've been affected by it, and sort of new relationships with people that are in the book, including my siblings, like really knowing what happened, because their father is the biggest monster in the book. There's just been a lot of good. So, I mean, sometimes I get a little bit, I'm like, wow, have I desensitized myself so much that I can sit in front of people and just be like, oh, that cult, oh, that abusive household that I escaped from. But in general, I'm just happy because I feel like I own it more, because it's there, it exists, it's an object. I can control it more. I know it's a complicated answer.
I have a question real quick. They asked,
Hi, Suki.
there was a question about the women, you know, and what they're doing now, and I'm also curious about the men, and like, did they all just stay in the family, or what about you? Like,
mostly, from what I know, they far more than the women, the boys, they're all boys to me because I don't know them as adults, stayed. But there are a few exceptions, but it's sort of obvious why. It's also why most of the survivors that are in this group are women. It's like if you stay long enough as a boy, you're going to become a man, and then you're going to have power. If you stay as a woman, it's just going to get worse and worse. But I don't know. I don't want to generalize about them because I don't know. But I know that a lot. Gabriel, for example, is still very much in.
So you haven't heard from them?
No, but it's so incredibly gossipy. So like even though I'm not in and I don't talk to some people because everyone's like brothers and sisters, and like literally or not, there's like, well, so and so said that, so and so said that, so and so said, and Gabriel's living here, and blah blah blah, and so and so's pissed that you said this and that. I really tried to tell Daria something the other day, and she was like, I know everything. It's in a group. We've been in a group text for weeks. Right. It's all anyone's talking about. Everyone's reading about, not the older generation, but our generation. Everyone's reading it, and everyone's mad. And they're all writing a book. I can't tell you who. Are we done?
Yeah. Thanks, y'all. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
When is the film gonna be out?